Wealth cannot buy a voice, nor can billions purchase a genuine smile. Victoria Sterling possessed half of Manhattan's commercial real estate, yet her greatest failure sat beside her in utter silence. Tonight's corporate Christmas gala was supposed to be a triumph, but it was about to become an unexpected reckoning. High above the freezing, slush-covered streets of New York City, Victoria Sterling stood in the pristine silence of her penthouse. At 34, she was the sole founder and CEO of Sterling Hayes Capital, a billionaire whose ruthless acquisition strategies had earned her the moniker the Iron Widow in the financial press. She was a woman who dealt in absolutes, margins, profits, hostile takeovers, and liquidations. Yet, looking into the adjacent room where her 7-year-old daughter, Lily, sat quietly reading a picture book, Victoria felt an overwhelming sense of inadequacy that no amount of money could cure. Lily was born profoundly deaf. It was a genetic anomaly, the doctors had explained gently, handing Victoria pamphlets on cochlear implants and speech therapy while her ex-husband, a European aristocrat who had only wanted a perfect heir, slowly packed his bags and faded from their lives. Since that day, Victoria had built a fortress around her daughter. She hired the best private tutors, retained top-tier audiologists from Mount Sinai, and employed a full-time, specialized nanny named Beatrice. Lily lacked nothing material. Her playroom was filled with sensory toys, her wardrobe rivaled a runway model's, and her trust fund was larger than the GDP of several small nations. But there was one thing Victoria could not buy: time. Between fending off aggressive board members like Richard Harrison, a venomous corporate shark who constantly sought to undermine her leadership, and managing a global portfolio, Victoria's attempts to learn American Sign Language, ASL, were fragmented. She knew the basics. She could sign food, sleep, I love you, and bathroom. But when it came to expressing nuanced emotions, to asking her daughter about the intricate landscapes of her imagination, Victoria's hands were clumsy and stiff. She often found herself relying on Beatrice to translate her love into motions, a reality that broke her heart a little more each day. The Sterling Hayes annual Christmas dinner was the crown jewel of the corporate social calendar. It was a mandatory show of strength and unity, held this year in the opulent grand ballroom of the Pierre Hotel. Usually, Victoria left Lily safely at home, shielded from the flashing cameras of the paparazzi and the probing eyes of Wall Street analysts. But this year, a damaging piece in the Wall Street Journal had painted Victoria as a cold, calculating machine devoid of human empathy, suggesting her ruthless nature made her an unstable long-term leader. The PR crisis team had been adamant. She needed to soften her image. She needed to show her humanity. Bring Lily, her public relations director, Sarah Jenkins, had insisted during a tense strategy meeting, just for the first hour, let them see the devoted mother. It changes the entire narrative. Victoria had fought the idea, her protective instincts flaring, but the board's restless murmurs about a potential vote of no confidence forced her hand. And so, on this crisp December evening, Lily was dressed in a bespoke crimson velvet dress, her dark hair pinned back with diamond clips. "You look beautiful, sweetheart," Victoria signed, her fingers forming the shapes with careful, practiced rigidity. Lily looked up, her large, expressive brown eyes registering her mother's stiff movements. The little girl offered a polite, small smile, a practiced expression she used when she didn't want to cause trouble, and signed back a simple thank you. Victoria's chest tightened. There was no spark, no childish joy. Lily was treating her the way Victoria treated her own board of directors, with cautious diplomacy. As the chauffeur drove their black Maybach down Fifth Avenue, the city was a blur of twinkling lights and festive chaos. Inside the soundproofed cabin, the silence was heavy. Victoria reached out, gently squeezing Lily's small hand. The child squeezed back, then turned her gaze out the window, watching a world she could see but never hear. Victoria silently vowed to make it a quick appearance. Just one photo op near the grand tree, a few handshakes with key investors like Gregory Miller, and then they would leave. She would not let her daughter become a pawn in a corporate game for long. But as the car pulled up to the red carpet outside the Pierre, and the blinding burst of camera flashes erupted like a sudden storm, Victoria realized she had made a terrible miscalculation. The sheer scale of the event, the aggressive energy of the paparazzi, and the aggressive posturing of the corporate elite were about to crash down on her silent, fragile world. The grand ballroom was a masterpiece of winter extravagance. Massive chandeliers draped with silver tinsel hung from the frescoed ceiling, casting a sparkling glow over tables adorned with towering centerpieces of white roses and frosted pine cones. To a hearing person, the room was a cacophony of wealth. The clinking of crystal champagne flutes, the booming laughter of executives making deals, the soaring melodies of a live string quartet playing Vivaldi's Winter. To Lily, it was a terrifying, chaotic landscape of vibrations and erratic motion. Victoria held tightly to her daughter's hand as they navigated the sea of tailored tuxedos and designer gowns. Almost immediately, they were intercepted by Richard Harrison. Richard was a tall, imposing man with silver hair and a smile that never quite reached his cold, calculating eyes. "Victoria, darling." "What a spectacular evening," Richard boomed, stepping into their path and effectively blocking their way to the quieter VIP section. He looked down at Lily, his expression shifting into an exaggerated, pitying mask. He didn't bend down to her eye level. Instead, he spoke over her head, raising his voice unnecessarily loudly, as if she were in another room. "And this must be the famous little Lily. Such a shame about her condition. But she looks absolutely precious." Victoria felt a familiar, protective rage simmer in her veins. "Her condition is not a tragedy, Richard. And she can read lips quite well when people bother to speak to her directly." Richard chuckled, waving a dismissive hand. Of course. Forgive me. It's just so brave of you to bring her into this environment." He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that Lily couldn't see. "Though I wonder if the investors will see a devoted mother or a distracted CEO." Before Victoria could deliver a searing retort, the CFO, Gregory Miller, interrupted, pulling Victoria into a pressing conversation regarding a sudden fluctuation in their European assets. For 3 agonizing minutes, Victoria was forced to engage in high-level financial triage, her attention momentarily ripped away from her daughter. In that brief window, the overwhelming sensory input of the ballroom became too much for Lily. The heavy bass of the cellos sent unsettling tremors through the floorboards, right into her velvet shoes. Strangers brushed past her, their large, looming figures casting erratic shadows. A waiter hurried by, dropping a silver tray of hors d'oeuvres that sent a jarring, sharp vibration through the floor. Startled, Lily let go of her mother's dress. Seeking refuge from the terrifying visual noise and the shaking ground, the little girl slipped away from the crowd. She navigated around the towering ice sculpture of the company logo and found a secluded, dimly lit alcove near the grand windows overlooking Central Park. She curled her knees to her chest, hiding behind the heavy velvet drapes, shutting her eyes tightly to block out the overwhelming world. A single tear escaped, hot and frustrated, sliding down her cheek. She felt completely, utterly alone. A few feet away, Arthur Pendleton was also trying to survive the evening. Arthur was a senior financial analyst at Sterling Hayes, a mid-level position that rarely afforded an invitation to this exclusive gala. However, his department had recently saved the firm millions through a grueling audit, and his manager had practically ordered him to attend. Arthur was 32, a widower, and a single father. Tonight, he was wearing a tailored but distinctly older charcoal suit, a stark contrast to the $5,000 Tom Ford creations surrounding him. Sitting next to Arthur at a secluded corner table was his 8-year-old son, Leo. Arthur had been forced to bring him when his regular babysitter canceled at the last minute due to a family emergency. Leo was quietly coloring in a sketchbook, completely unfazed by the corporate titans around him. Arthur sipped his club soda, watching the ostentatious display of wealth with mild amusement and deep exhaustion. He just wanted to put in his required hour, eat a plate of expensive steak, and take his son home to their modest apartment in Queens. Then, Arthur noticed a small flash of crimson velvet dart behind the heavy drapes near the window. He frowned, setting his drink down. He watched as the fabric trembled slightly. Knowing that children in adult environments often found themselves overwhelmed, Arthur gently patted Leo's shoulder. Stay right here, buddy. Keep drawing. I'll be right back. Arthur approached the alcove slowly, not wanting to startle whoever was hiding. He gently pulled back the edge of the curtain. There, huddled on the carpeted floor, was the CEO's daughter. He recognized her instantly from the company-wide emails and the brief flurry of gossip when she had arrived. He saw the tear stains on her cheeks, the way her hands were clamped over her ears, a self-soothing gesture to block out visual and vibratory chaos. Arthur didn't speak. He knew, as the whole company knew, that the CEO's daughter was deaf. He knelt down slowly, making sure he was directly in her line of sight, but keeping a respectful distance. He waited patiently until Lily opened her tear-filled eyes and noticed him. She stiffened, expecting the stranger to either drag her back to her mother or speak to her in that loud, exaggerated way hearing people always used. Instead, Arthur offered a warm, incredibly gentle smile. He raised his hands, and with fluid, flawless, native-level grace, he signed, "Hello, it is very loud out there. My name is Arthur." Lily's eyes widened in sheer shock. Her breath hitched. The man's signs weren't the stiff, practiced textbook motions her mother used. They were natural, expressive, and matched perfectly with his warm facial expressions. Slowly, hesitantly, Lily raised her small hands. "You know ASL?" Arthur's smile widened. He nodded, his hands moving like poetry. "Yes, a very long time. Are you okay?" "The floor shakes a lot here. It hurts my feet, too." It was a simple statement, but to Lily, it was a profound validation of her experience. Someone understood the chaotic vibrations. The fear in her chest began to loosen. "I don't like it here," she signed back, her movements becoming less guarded. "People look at me like I am broken." Arthur's eyes softened with a deep, empathetic sorrow. He shifted his weight, sitting cross-legged on the floor right there in his suit, completely ruining the crease of his trousers. "You're not broken," he signed, emphasizing the signs with absolute certainty. "You are just speaking a beautiful language they are too busy to learn." A tiny, genuine smile, the first real smile of the entire evening, broke across Lily's face. It was a radiant, heartbreakingly beautiful expression that transformed her completely. "I have a secret," Arthur signed, leaning in slightly with a playful twinkle in his eye. "My son is sitting over there. He is drawing a picture of a very fat penguin in a tuxedo because he thinks all these bosses look like penguins. Do you want to see?" Lily let out a silent giggle, her shoulders finally dropping their defensive tension. She nodded eagerly. Arthur held out his hand. Lily took it without hesitation, trusting this stranger who spoke her language from the heart. Across the ballroom, Victoria had just extracted herself from the CFO's grasp. Panic seized her throat when she realized Lily was no longer by her side. She spun around, her heart hammering wildly against her ribs, terrifying scenarios flashing through her mind. She pushed past a group of startled vice presidents, her eyes frantically scanning the crowd. Then she stopped, dead in her tracks. Near a quiet corner table, she saw Lily. But her daughter wasn't crying, and she wasn't hiding. Lily was standing next to a young boy with a sketchbook, and she was laughing a full, vibrant, silent laugh. Beside them stood a man in an unremarkable suit. Victoria watched in stunned silence as the man conversed with her daughter, his hands moving in a mesmerizing, fluid dance of ASL that Victoria could barely track. He was telling a story, his facial expressions animated and kind, and Lily was completely enthralled, signing back with an enthusiasm Victoria hadn't seen in years. Victoria stood frozen, a complex storm of emotions warring in her chest. Profound relief that her daughter was safe, a sharp, bitter pang of maternal jealousy that a stranger had unlocked the joy she so desperately tried to buy, and an intense, burning curiosity. Who was this man, and how did he know how to make her silent daughter smile like that? From the chamois on the bar, Richard Harrison was also watching the scene unfold. He noted the awe in the CEO's eyes, and he noted the low-level analyst making himself remarkably comfortable with the billionaire's air. A sinister, calculating smirk touched Richard's lips. In the cutthroat world of Sterling Hayes Capital, A vulnerability had just been exposed, and Richard knew exactly how to turn this heartwarming moment into a weapon. Crossing the sprawling ballroom floor, Victoria felt a magnetic pull toward the quiet corner table. Her heart drummed a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She was a woman accustomed to total control. She commanded boardrooms, dictated market trends, and fired executives without a second thought. Yet, approaching this modest analyst who had effortlessly captivated her daughter, she felt entirely out of her depth. As she drew near, Arthur caught sight of her out of the corner of his eye. He didn't scramble to his feet or spill his drink in a panic, as most mid-level employees did when the Iron Widow approached. Instead, he calmly tapped Lily on the shoulder and signed, "Your mother is here." Lily turned, the brilliant smile lingering on her lips. For the first time in years, she didn't shrink back into her protective shell when Victoria arrived. She simply reached out and took Arthur's hand, then looked up at her mother. "Miss Sterling," Arthur said, standing up smoothly. His voice was deep and steady, devoid of the sycophantic tremor Victoria was so used to hearing. "I hope you don't mind. We were just discussing the sheer volume of penguin suits in the room." Victoria looked from Arthur to her daughter, her meticulously manicured nails digging into her expensive clutch. "Mr. Pendleton, isn't it? From the Compliance and Auditing Division." "Yes, ma'am, Arthur Pendleton. And this is my son, Leo," he said, gesturing to the boy who was now holding up a rather impressive sketch of Richard Harrison with a beak and flippers. Victoria couldn't help but let out a short, genuine breath of amusement before her corporate mask slipped back into place. "How do you know American Sign Language, Mr. Pendleton? And please, do not give me the standard corporate answer about diverse skill sets. Your fluency is native. You sign with an accent I haven't seen outside of the deaf community." Arthur's gaze softened, a flash of old grief passing through his eyes before settling into a peaceful acceptance. "My late wife, Clara, was profoundly deaf. We grew up on the same street in Brooklyn. I learned ASL before I learned to ride a bike so I could talk to her. We were married for 6 years before she passed away." The revelation struck Victoria like a physical blow. The annoyance and jealousy she had harbored instantly dissolved, replaced by a profound, echoing respect. Here was a man who understood the weight of silence, a man who had loved someone in the exact way Victoria was struggling to love her own child. Before Victoria could find the words to respond, a sharp, patronizing voice sliced through the delicate atmosphere. Well, slumming it with the back office staff, Victoria?" Richard Harrison materialized from the crowd, holding a crystal tumbler of scotch. He had an arrogant smirk plastered across his face, and trailing right behind him was Thomas Sterling, no relation, but a key European investor whose capital was vital to their upcoming quarter. "We were looking everywhere for you," Richard continued, his voice carrying just loudly enough for nearby executives to turn their heads. "Thomas was hoping to discuss the merger in Frankfurt, but it seems you're occupied with babysitting duties. Perhaps this isn't the best environment for someone so distracted." Arthur felt his jaw clench. He recognized the play immediately. Richard was using Victoria's child and her moment of vulnerability to humiliate her in front of a primary stakeholder. Victoria's spine turned to steel. "Richard, if you cannot see the value in connecting with the people who actually keep this firm profitable, that is your failing, not mine. Mr. Pendleton's department just saved us $8 million in tax redundancies." $8 million is pocket change, Victoria," Richard sneered, stepping closer. He looked down at Arthur, his eyes full of venom. "Run along, Pendleton. The adults have business to discuss." Arthur didn't move. He looked directly at Richard, his expression perfectly composed. "Actually, Mr. Harrison, if you review the Frankfurt compliance metrics, you'll find a massive regulatory loophole in their pension structuring. If you finalize that merger before Q3, the SEC will bury this firm in fines. But, as you said, I am just the back office staff." The silence that followed was deafening. Thomas, the European investor, raised an eyebrow, suddenly looking very interested in Arthur. Richard's face flushed a deep, mottled red. "What did he say?" Lily signed to her mother, her small fingers flying. Victoria looked down at her daughter, a rare, fierce smile breaking across her face. She raised her own hands, stiff but determined. He told the penguin to swim away. Lily covered her mouth to stifle a giggle. Victoria turned back to Arthur, her eyes gleaming with newfound realization. "Mr. Pendleton, please have your assistant clear your schedule for Monday morning. You and I have a great deal to discuss." She didn't wait for Richard's spluttering response. She took Lily's hand, gave Leo a nod of approval for his drawing, and walked out of the Pierre Hotel with her head held high. Monday morning hit the Sterling Hayes building with the destructive force of a hurricane. By 8:00 a.m., the gossip mill was churning at maximum capacity. The narrative, carefully planted and watered by Richard Harrison and his loyalists over the weekend, was toxic. Victoria Sterling was losing her edge. The Iron Widow was crumbling under the pressure of single motherhood. She was taking financial advice from a mid-level auditor just because he entertained her disabled daughter. Sitting in her glass-walled penthouse office, Victoria ignored the ringing phones and the frantic emails from her PR team. Spread across her mahogany desk was Arthur Pendleton's personnel file. He was 32, graduated magna cum laude from Columbia, and possessed an analytical mind that bordered on genius. Yet, he had been passed over for promotion 3 times in the last 4 years. The notes from his direct supervisor, a man in Richard's pocket, cited a lack of aggressive ambition and too much focus on work-life balance. Victoria scoffed. In her world, wanting to go home to raise a motherless child was seen as a weakness. It made her sick. At 9:00 a.m. sharp, Arthur knocked on the heavy glass door. He looked exhausted, the dark circles under his eyes prominent, but his suit was impeccably pressed. "You wanted to see me, Miss Sterling?" "Sit down, Arthur," Victoria said, dropping the formalities. She closed his file. "I'll get straight to the point. Richard Harrison is attempting to orchestrate a board vote to oust me as CEO. He's claiming my personal life is interfering with my fiduciary duties, and he is using our interaction on Saturday as his prime evidence." Arthur sighed, sinking into the leather chair. "I apologize if I caused you any trouble. I just saw a little girl who was scared. I know that look. Clara used to get it when the subway was too crowded." "You have nothing to apologize for," Victoria said sharply. "In fact, you gave my daughter the best night she's had in years. And you embarrassed Richard in front of a key investor, which was deeply satisfying." She leaned forward, steepling her fingers. "I want to offer you a position. Director of Strategic Risk. It comes with a corner office, a base salary, triple what you make now, and stock options." Arthur's eyes widened slightly, but he didn't leap at the offer. He watched her carefully. "And what is the catch, Miss Sterling?" "In this building, there is always a catch." Victoria swallowed hard, her throat tightening. The ruthless CEO melted away, leaving only a desperate, terrified mother. "I need your help, Arthur. I need you to teach me how to speak to my daughter. The tutors, the apps, the textbooks, none of it works. I sign like a robot. Lily looks at me, and she sees a stranger. When she looked at you, she saw a friend." A heavy silence filled the executive suite. Arthur looked at the billionaire.
Seeing past the designer clothes and the terrifying reputation, he saw the raw, bleeding grief of a parent failing to connect with her child.
But Arthur was a man of principle, and he knew the dangers of blending personal salvation with corporate ambition. "No," Arthur said softly. Victoria flinched as if she had been slapped. "No? Arthur, I am offering you financial security for the rest of your life. You can put your son through any college he wants." "I am not going to let you buy me to be a surrogate father figure, Victoria," Arthur said, his voice firm but compassionate. "And I won't let you turn ASL into another corporate acquisition. You cannot outsource your relationship with your daughter. If you want to learn to communicate with Lily, it requires humility. It requires you to stop being the CEO and start being vulnerable. You can't buy that with a director title." Victoria stared at him, stunned. No one had spoken to her like this in a decade. No one had dared to tell her she couldn't buy her way out of a problem. Before she could process the rejection, her office phone blared the emergency red line, the direct line from the chief legal counsel. Victoria snatched it up. "What is it?" "Victoria, it's David," the lawyer said, his voice laced with panic. "Richard just dropped a bomb. He's filed a formal grievance with HR and the SEC. He's claiming Arthur Pendleton fabricated the $8 million tax redundancy to cover up his own embezzlement, and that you are complicit because you are promoting him to keep him quiet. Victoria's blood ran ice cold. That is an absurd fabrication. We have the audit logs. Richard had his cronies in IT wipe the secondary servers an hour ago. David rushed out. He's framing Pendleton to force an emergency suspension, and he's using it to trigger a vote of no confidence against you at noon today. Victoria, he's going for the throat. If we don't fire Pendleton immediately and throw him under the bus, you lose the company. Victoria slowly lowered the receiver. She looked across the desk at Arthur, who was watching her with a calm, perceptive gaze. He didn't know what had just been said, but he could read the devastation on her face. For the first time in her life, Victoria Sterling, the Iron Widow, was trapped in a corner. She had to choose: sacrifice the one man who could save her relationship with her daughter, or lose the empire she had sacrificed her life to build. Victoria slowly lowered the phone back onto its cradle, the click echoing like a gunshot in the cavernous executive suite. Her usually immaculate posture sagged for a fraction of a second before her spine rigidified into the defensive posture that had earned her the Iron Widow moniker. She looked across the desk at Arthur Pendleton. He sat calmly, his hands resting on his knees, watching the myriad of emotions flicker across her face. "Richard has just initiated a corporate coup," Victoria stated, her voice devoid of all warmth, dropping the temperature in the room by several degrees. He filed a formal grievance with Human Resources and the Securities and Exchange Commission. He is alleging that the $8 million you saved us was a fabricated cover-up for your own embezzlement. Arthur's brow furrowed slightly, but he did not leap from his chair in a panic. He simply tilted his head. "And what is his proof?" "He doesn't need proof. He needs a smokescreen," Victoria snapped, standing up and pacing behind her desk. His allies in the IT department wiped the secondary servers an hour ago. All the audit logs, the digital paper trail proving his mismanagement and your corrective actions are gone. He is demanding your immediate termination and suspension, using the scandal to trigger a board vote of no confidence against me at noon today. If I don't feed you to the wolves right now, I lose my company. For a moment, the only sound in the office was the low hum of the Manhattan traffic far below. Victoria waited for the inevitable breakdown. She waited for Arthur to beg for his job, to swear his innocence, or to threaten a lawsuit. That was how the game was played on Wall Street. Instead, Arthur let out a slow, deeply tired sigh. He reached into his suit pocket, pulled out a small, worn leather notebook, and opened it. "Miss Sterling," Arthur began, his voice perfectly level, "when my wife, Clara, was in the hospital, the administration lost her medical directives because of a server migration error. It was a digital mistake that cost me the most precious person in my life. Since that day, I do not trust the cloud. I do not trust network servers, and I certainly do not trust Richard Harrison's cronies in the IT department." Victoria stopped pacing. "What are you saying?" "I am an auditor," Arthur said, looking up with a fierce, unwavering intelligence in his eyes. "My entire job is anticipating worst-case scenarios. When I found the massive regulatory loophole in the Frankfurt merger last month, I knew Richard would try to bury it, so I didn't just back the files up to the secondary servers." He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a heavy, tamper-proof external hard drive, placing it gently on the mahogany desk. "This is an air-gapped, encrypted physical drive. It contains every unalterable log, original email, and financial statement proving Richard's gross negligence. Furthermore," Arthur continued, checking his watch, "because I am legally bound by the Sarbanes-Oxley Act, I sent physical, notarized hard copies of these exact files to an independent contact at Deloitte, as well as the SEC whistleblower office in Washington, D.C., via certified overnight mail on Friday evening. They signed for it at 8:14 a.m. this morning." Victoria stared at the black rectangular drive sitting on her desk as if it were the Holy Grail. A slow, predatory smile, the kind that terrified her competitors, spread across her face. The trap Richard had set was not a cage, it was his own guillotine. "Arthur Pendleton," Victoria whispered, genuine awe lacing her words, You are brilliant. I am just thorough, Arthur corrected gently. He stood up, buttoning his jacket. You have your weapon, Miss Sterling. You can take this to the board at noon and destroy him. But my earlier statement stands. I will not accept a promotion given as a bribe, and I will not be your shortcut to your daughter. If you fire me, I will survive. If you keep me, I remain in my current role. Victoria looked at the man who had just handed her the keys to her kingdom. She thought of Lily's radiant smile the night before, the way Arthur's hands had spoken a language of empathy she had entirely failed to master. The realization hit her with the force of a freight train. Arthur was right. She could not buy her way out of her failures as a mother. She had to do the work. I am not going to fire you, Arthur, Victoria said softly, her predatory smile fading into something remarkably genuine and vulnerable. And I am not going to bribe you. But I am asking, as a mother who is terrified of losing her child to a silence she cannot bridge, will you please tell me where to begin? Arthur looked at her, seeing the walls of the Iron Widow finally, truly crumbling. He offered a small, encouraging nod. You begin by showing up. No bodyguards, no PR team, just you. The atmosphere in conference room A on the 50th floor was toxic. At exactly 12:00 p.m., the 12 members of the board of directors sat around the massive glass table, their faces grim. Richard Harrison sat at the head, looking exceptionally smug, flanked by two corporate lawyers. On the large video monitor at the end of the room, Thomas Sterling, their primary European investor, dialed in from London. Let the record show that the CEO is late, Richard announced loudly, checking his gold Rolex. A fitting testament to her recent lack of focus. I move that we commence the vote regarding the immediate suspension of Victoria. The heavy oak doors swung open. Victoria strode into the room, but she was not alone. Flanking her was David, her chief legal counsel, and trailing just behind them, looking entirely unbothered by the billions of dollars of net worth glaring at him, was Arthur Pendleton. You will not commence anything, Richard, Victoria said, her voice ringing with absolute authority. She did not sit down. She stood at the opposite end of the table, commanding the room's oxygen. Before we discuss any manufactured grievances regarding my personal life, we are going to discuss fiduciary treason. Richard scoffed, though a flicker of unease crossed his eyes. Victoria, this is pathetic. Your pet auditor is under investigation for a massive embezzlement scheme. The servers have already confirmed the discrepancies. The network servers were wiped at 8:03 a.m. this morning by IT Director Marcus Vance, who has already provided a sworn statement to legal that he did so under your direct verbal orders. David, the legal counsel, interjected smoothly, dropping a thick stack of printed affidavits onto the glass table. Richard's face drained of color. That is a lie. You have no proof. Victoria gestured to Arthur, who stepped forward and placed the encrypted hard drive on the table. He connected it to the boardroom's central display. Within seconds, the massive screen shifted from Thomas Sterling's face to a detailed, irrefutable spreadsheet. This is an air-gapped, offline backup of the true Frankfurt merger audit, Arthur explained, addressing the board directly. It details exactly how Mr. Harrison bypassed international compliance laws to inflate short-term stock value, a move that would have resulted in federal indictments for everyone in this room by Q4. The SEC whistleblower office received the hard copies 3 hours ago. Pandemonium erupted in the boardroom. The board members, previously ready to oust Victoria, turned on Richard like starved wolves. Thomas Sterling leaned into his camera, his British accent dripping with disdain. Richard, you are a catastrophic liability. Consider my capital entirely contingent on his immediate removal. Victoria. Richard stood up, his chair clattering backward. He pointed a trembling finger at Victoria. You think you've won? You're still a cold, broken machine. You can't even talk to your own child. The insult, designed to pierce her deepest insecurity, hung in the air. But instead of flinching, Victoria felt a profound, overwhelming sense of peace. You're right, Richard. I have failed in many ways, Victoria said, her voice steady and clear. I spent my life building a fortress of wealth, thinking it would protect my daughter. It only isolated her, but I am fixing that. And my first step is cleaning house. She turned to the security guard standing by the door. Escort Mr. Harrison out of my building. As Richard was forcibly removed, shouting empty threats down the hallway, the board turned their expectant eyes to Victoria. They anticipated a triumphant speech, a declaration of a new aggressive market strategy. Instead, Victoria took a deep breath. Effective at the end of this quarter, I will be stepping down as Chief Executive Officer to assume the role of co-chair of the board. David will take over as interim CEO. Gasps echoed around the table. Arthur looked at her in genuine shock. I have spent 7 years managing this company while managing my daughter from afar, Victoria continued, her eyes meeting Arthur's for a brief, thankful moment. Sterling Hayes Capital is secure, but my family is not. It is time I step out of the boardroom and into my daughter's life. 6 months later, the summer sun beat down on the lush, green expanse of conservatory water in Central Park. The corporate battles of the winter felt like a distant, faded memory. Victoria sat on a slightly damp picnic blanket, wearing a simple pair of jeans and a white blouse. There were no cameras, no PR directors, and no bodyguards. Her phone was deliberately left inside her apartment. A few feet away, Leo was excitedly showing Lily how to pilot a remote-controlled sailboat across the pond. Lily was laughing, the bright, vibrant, soundless laugh that Victoria had finally learned to recognize as the most beautiful thing in the world. Arthur sat beside Victoria on the blanket, handing her a plastic cup of lukewarm lemonade. You missed a modifier on the sign for beautiful earlier, he noted gently, his eyes tracking the children. You signed that the boat was pretty, but for a boat that fast, you want a larger, more emphatic motion. Victoria smiled, raising her hands. She formed the signs slowly, not with the rigid, textbook panic she used to have, but with a deliberate, fluid grace she had practiced every single day for half a year. Like this, she signed. Perfect, Arthur signed back, a warm smile crinkling the corners of his eyes. Lily turned back from the edge of the water. She looked at her mother, her brown eyes bright with an unburdened childhood joy. She raised her small hands, her fingers moving in a rapid, seamless flutter. Mom, Lily signed. Watch me. Victoria felt a lump form in her throat. For the first time in her life, she didn't need a translator. She didn't need to guess. She understood her daughter perfectly. I see you, sweetheart, Victoria signed back, pressing her hand over her heart. I will always see you. The millions of dollars in Victoria's bank accounts remained, but sitting on the grass, watching her daughter's hands dance in the sunlight, she knew she had finally found the only wealth that mattered. A language of love, built not in silence, but in motion, patience, and absolute presence. Did this story of a mother's true sacrifice and the beautiful power of American Sign Language touch your heart? Sometimes the greatest wealth isn't found in a boardroom, but in the patience to learn a new way to say, I love you. If Victoria and Arthur's journey resonated with you, please hit the like button, share this video with your friends, and subscribe for more emotional real-life stories.